On the 29th of June 2011, 7 high school students of the National Outdoor Leadership School would embark on a month-long camping trip deep within the Alaskan wilderness. The names of those 7 students are Joshua Berg, Noah Allaire, Sam Gotzigan, Sam Melman, Victor Martin, Shane Garlock, and Sam Boas. For 24 days, the group of 7 students and 3 instructors would trek 40 miles through the western Talkeetna Mountains. Nearing the end of their trip on the 25th day, the instructors would leave the students on their own for their last 24 miles to put the skills they had learned to use. These 24 miles were expected to be covered in 3 days, where they would once again meet up with their instructors and re-enter civilization. Before leaving, one of the instructors would shoot a smile at the group and say, "Don't die," something they probably never believed would actually happen. Though completely cut off from speaking with anyone outside of their group and left on their own deep in the Alaskan wilderness, they did have a GPS beacon they could signal that would alert authorities in case of an emergency, but that was it. During their lone trek through the bush, the boys would follow the creek, using it as a trail and a way to escape traveling through the rugged and difficult landscape. The creek would also be home to a consistent food source of rainbow trout. However, one of the downsides to following the creek was its narrow trail and constant twists and turns which forced the group to walk in a tight single-file line. This would limit their vision as they couldn't see around corners and didn't know what they were walking to until they had physically turned the corner. After about an hour of fishing and celebrating some success in catching a few very small fish, Joshua Berg, who was in front of the line, would make his way around one of these corners in the creek and see what he thought at first was a giant bale of hay 30 feet in front of him. After a few seconds, his heart rate would rise as he realized that this was not a hay bale in front of him, but a 500-pound grizzly bear. Now, Josh had been taught it was best to stand his ground if confronted by a bear, but with panic setting in and nowhere to really go, he turned around and ran. In the time the other members of the group heard him scream bear, the 7-foot grizzly had already closed the distance between them. From the perspective of the other members, they would hear Josh yell bear and then see this mountain of a beast lunge at Josh, slamming him to the ground. After letting out a deafening roar, signaling its presence, the bear would bite into Josh's head. With his head in the bear's mouth, Josh attempted to punch the bear's nose, knowing it was one of the most sensitive parts of its body, but within seconds he would feel, and the rest of the group would hear, his skull crack under the pressure of the bear's jaws. Though 3 of the 7 students were carrying bear repellent, everything was happening so quickly and the scene was so violent, all they could think to do was flee through the brush on the ridges of the creek. In this fight-or flight moment, Sam Gotzigan would hear the blood-curdling scream of his friend Josh and look back to see the bear had lifted him in the air, his now bloodied head clenched tightly between the bear's teeth and his body being thrown around like a rag doll. As Sam watched the bear throw Josh to the ground and tear into his chest, it was Victor, who was with Sam, that would ask in a state of shock, "Is Josh being eaten?" But it was not only Josh screaming in a state of panic and terror. 4 of the 7 boys were screaming as they ran to find a place to hide. Sam continued to watch this bear brutalize his friend, trying to make some sense of what was happening and deciding whether to run or try to fight and help save his friend. But those few moments of hesitation were all the bear needed to turn on him. As it dropped Josh and bounded toward him, Sam was only able to take a few steps backwards before the bear hit him at full force. Slamming against the ground, Sam rolled and attempted to get onto his knees when the bear, just as it had done to Josh, bit down on his head with another audible crack sounding out. But unlike Josh, Sam was somehow able to escape from its jaws and attempted to run, but only made it a few feet before the bear was on top of him again. In a frenzy, it began to bite his hand, neck, chest, arms, and back while using its claws to rip through his rib cage. As quickly as this brutal and terrifying attack took place, it seemingly ended. The boys' violent screams were now pain-filled moans, and the air around them was once again still. Noah, who was hiding on the left side of the creek bank, would look out to see what had happened, and spot Sam Melman on the opposite side. For a moment, they just exchanged looks of confusion, unsure of what had ended the attack. But quickly, Noah would drop his backpack and run to provide aid to Josh, who was bleeding heavily in the creek bed. With his eyes focused on his dying friend, Noah was ambushed by the bear, who had not yet left. With one swipe of its paw, Noah's scalp was almost torn off and the bear's teeth sunk into his back and chest as its jaw closed down on his side. The bear then lifted Noah 3 feet off the ground and shook him side to side before throwing him back down. While Noah lay injured and stunned from the impact of hitting the ground, the bear would then rise to its hind legs, seemingly ready to stomp down on Noah and crush him. But while in this elevated 7-foot position, it would spot 3 of the boys who had been hiding on the opposite side of the creek bed watching on in horror. Upon seeing them there, the bear, for whatever reason, decided it was time to leave and began to flee, but inadvertently came across Victor, who was standing next to the injured Sam. In a quick motion, the bear latched its teeth around Victor's left calf. Luckily for Victor, he was able to kick his leg free, and it's believed during the struggle he may have kicked it in the nose, which was more incentive for the already retreating bear to leave the group alone. From the ridge, one of the 3 boys who remained unharmed would call out to the others that the bear had left. Josh, who was still somehow conscious after having his skull fractured by the bear, would start crawling toward his backpack, which had the GPS beacon inside. Noah, now drenched in blood after nearly being scalped by the bear's claws, would get to his feet and make his way to Josh, who would tell him to get the beacon. While Noah struggled to pull the red plastic tab on the beacon open, the 3 other boys rushed down to assist the group. Sam Boas, who was a certified emergency medical responder, cradled Josh's bleeding head in his lap in an attempt to keep him from moving. Still unable to open the beacon, the other boys took the box from Noah and wiped his blood off the instructions. In their panicked efforts to pull on the red tab which opened the box, they would actually break the tab, making it even harder to get the beacon open. Eventually, Shane Garlock would use his pocket knife to pry the box open and the boys would activate the GPS. Now with the beacon open and sending out their coordinates, the boys' full attention was focused on the wounded. Noah would check on Sam Gottsigan and find the bear's claw had pierced through Sam's lung on entry through his ribcage. This meant if they had to wait too long for medical assistance, Sam's other lung would collapse. Noah, with some life-saving quick thinking, would rush to tear apart a garbage bag and place it over the puncture wound, creating an airtight seal. Sam Boas would continue to keep Josh's head in his lap, fearing the attack had left Josh with spinal or brain injuries. Josh's condition was critical. His head had been mangled beyond recognition and was bleeding profusely, whilst his legs were also going numb. Drenched in blood, Josh readily accepted he was going to die, and asked one of the boys to get the video camera in his bag. When Sam Millman asked why he would want his camera, Josh would tell him he needed to make a video saying goodbye to his family. At just 17 years old, Josh would make a farewell video to his friends and family, giving them his love and apologizing that he would no longer be around. Once the video ended, Sam Millman would lead Josh in a Jewish prayer, traditionally sung as the person's last words. While the boys waited for rescue, Shane Garlock would set up the 4-man tent to keep them out of the rain, and the 7 boys would pack into it. Noah would wrap his bloodied scalp with bandages, and the tent would quickly become a makeshift hospital. Sam Millman and Sam Boas, who had some medical experience, would get to work, whilst Noah, who was a lifeguard, would run the operation. First, those who were not injured donated their clothing to keep Sam Gottsigan and Josh Berg warm. Victor and Shane would follow orders from the 2 Sams and Noah, who would say things like, keep pressure on the chest, take their pulse, lay across Sam and Josh's chest to keep them warm. The boys would do whatever they could to convince Josh to stay awake, knowing if he were to fall asleep, he may not wake up again. For 5 hours, the boys would do all that they could, taking pulses, peeing in bottles to create makeshift hot water bottles for warmth, and reassuring each other that they would get through the ordeal. Just after 2 a.m, a helicopter would reach the campsite, and the Alaskan trooper who stepped out would become witness to 7 boys who were all drenched in blood. Though comforted by the sight of authorities and help from the outside world, the boys would have to make a decision. The helicopter that arrived was not big enough to fit all 7 boys and was not equipped to deal with severe trauma cases. This meant that both Josh Berg and Sam Gottsigan would need to wait for another, larger and better equipped helicopter to arrive. Alaskan Trooper Michael Shelley would insist that the wounded boys Victor and Noah, as well as Shane Garlock, would leave with the pilot, while Michael stayed with the severely wounded. However, one of the boys would need to stay behind, and though Sam Millman would offer, Sam Boas would ultimately be the one to stay with Michael and the 2 remaining boys. After 3 more hours, the second helicopter would arrive and take the remaining boys out of the wilderness and to the hospital. Victor Martin would be treated for the bite on his leg and released. Noah Allaire would have his scalp stapled back into place, and it would be found his lung had also been punctured by the bear's tooth, but in time would heal on its own. Sam Gotzigan would be treated for broken ribs, and his lung would need to be reinflated but would make a full recovery. Josh Berg would enter surgery for over 8 hours, where they would need to insert a titanium plate and bone graft into his skull. After 20 days in the hospital, Josh would be released, and though he has scarring, he was fortunate enough to avoid drastic changes to his appearance. As for the bear, it's never been found, and the reason for its attack is unclear. Experts were shocked to hear of a grizzly bear attacking such a large group, as they usually avoided numbers larger than 4. However, it's believed the bear was either protecting a kill or had a cub nearby. If you're interested in hearing Josh Berg speak on the experience, I've linked a TED Talk he did in the description below. Born in New York on April 29, 1957, Timothy Treadwell was the middle child in a family of 5 who had always been fond of animals. During his high school years, Timothy's parents would describe him as an ordinary kid, but that would start to change when he entered college. After entering college on a swimming scholarship, Timothy would reinvent himself from a son of a family of 5 to a British orphan who was born in Australia. Soon the college party lifestyle would take over, resulting in Timothy losing his scholarship and leading him to start auditioning for various sitcoms. According to Timothy's father, he would enter a downward spiral with drugs and alcohol after losing a role on the sitcom Cheers to Woody Harrelson. In his book Among Grizzlies, Timothy would speak on his drug and alcohol abuse in the late 80s, which resulted in an overdose. This would lead to a drastic change in Timothy's life. After leaving the hospital for the overdose, a friend would urge him to travel to Alaska to watch bears, which would spur his lifelong love of the animal. Together with his then girlfriend, they would start the non-profit organization Grizzly People, which aimed to educate people and children about bears while also funding his trips to Alaska. During the winter months, Timothy would work as a bartender to keep the money coming in, and each summer, for 13 years, Timothy would spend most of his time in Hallow Bay within the Katmai National Park of southwest Alaska. Here, Timothy would record hundreds of hours of footage and stills of bears he came across. However, almost from the start, Timothy's cavalier attitude would draw concern from the park rangers. From 1994 to 2003, Timothy would receive 6 different park violations, which were for guiding tourists without a license, camping in the same area longer than the 5-day limit, improper food storage, wildlife harassment, use of a portable generator, and various altercations with other visitors. Timothy would also refuse to install an electric fence around his camp, and though he had used pepper spray on a bear once, he felt so bad about it that he refused to continue carrying it. His method of operating with the bears would often break most of the park's rules, and was deemed wildlife harassment and interference with natural processes by his colleagues. In late September 2003, where our story begins, Timothy would bring his girlfriend Amy to Alaska with him. Amy was reported to have fallen in love with Timothy through his book and quit her job to live with him in Malibu, where she would start a new job after she and Tim returned for the winter. Before that trip in September 2003, Amy and Timothy had spent 3 previous summers together in Alaska, so she wasn't new to these trips. However, this time around, the couple stayed in the Katmai National Park later than they usually would. This meant that the bears were now attempting to gain as much fat as possible in preparation for their winter hibernation, but during this autumn period, when the bears are their hungriest, food sources are harder to find, which causes the bears to become more aggressive than usual. As someone infatuated with bears, Timothy had to know this, but he still set his camp up near a salmon stream where the bears commonly roamed. Amy would write in her diary about her fear of the bears, how she was uncomfortable in their presence and that she wanted to leave. Something they would actually do, returning to the nearby Kodiak Island to store their gear and take their returning flight back to California. On Kodiak Island, they would find their return ticket price had increased, and after an argument with the airline, the two would decide to return to their campsite for an additional week. During this week, Timothy was fixated on locating one of his favourite female bears he was yet to see. The bears Timothy was familiar with had all gone into hibernation by the time they returned, and bears from other areas of the park, ones Timothy didn't know, were moving into the area. It appears around this time Amy was growing more concerned with their situation and Timothy's behaviour. Timothy would write in his diary that she believed he was hell-bent on destruction, and she would be leaving him for good once they returned to California. Around noon on Sunday, October 5th, a day before the couple was due to leave, Timothy would speak with a friend and ex-partner, Jill Palovic, via satellite phone. Jill would report them as being in high spirits and excited to have located the bear Timothy had been looking for. Timothy would then make another call to his pilot friend, Willie Fulton, to pick them up on the beach the following afternoon. At 2 p.m. on Monday, October 6th, Willie Fulton would arrive as scheduled to pick Timothy and Amy up. After landing, he sees what he believes is Timothy shaking out a tarp and yells to him, but receives no answer. Though no one has responded, Willie notices movement and decides to hike up toward their camp. As Willie drew nearer to the camp, he began to feel as if something was off. He continued to call out, but no one answered. Siding with his better judgment, Willie turned back toward his plane, now moving faster than he had been before. Just as Willie got into his plane, he took another look behind him and saw a large, nasty-looking bear sneaking down the trail in his direction. Once back in the air, Willie decided to try scare the bear away from the campsite by flying over it. Willie would fly over the campsite 15 to 20 times, and during it, he would notice the bear was eating something at the campsite, something that looked very similar to a rib cage. Despite his attempts to scare it away, all it did was cause the bear to feed faster. After rangers were notified that neither Timothy or Amy had been sighted, they would request Willie to stay nearby if he could do so safely. By 4:26, a team of rangers and state troopers would arrive at the lake and begin to interview Willie on what had happened. Though having little to no details for the officers, Willie expressed with confidence that something had happened to the couple. Not long after the interview, Willie and the three rangers would begin their hike toward the camp, which was on top of a ridge and surrounded by tall grass and bushes. Due to the lack of visibility and waiting on two more rangers, the four decided to wait at the base of the hill before moving forward. While waiting, one of the rangers in front of the group would spot a bear, the same one Willie had seen moving toward them. Despite their best efforts to dissuade the bear, it continued forward, and the ranger would conclude the bear was aware of their presence and actively stalking them. With no other option, the rangers opened fire, first dropping and then killing the bear. The group then moved through the base of the campsite, discovering human remains buried under dirt and twigs. Moving into the camp, they would find Amy and Timothy's two tents, one they used for gear and the other for sleeping. Though both were torn and collapsed, both the couple's shoes were still neatly placed outside. In front of these tents was a large mound of mud, grass and sticks, 5 feet long, 4 feet wide and 3 feet high. A ranger would move some of the dirt to discover a human arm and fingers buried beneath. Combing the nearby areas, investigators would soon find Timothy's head connected to a small piece of his spine, with the frozen, distorted expression still on it. When investigators started to unearth the dirt mound they'd found in front of the tent, they would discover Amy's remains, who is reported as appearing peaceful, though like Timothy, most of her body had also been eaten. During the extraction of the couple's remains, two more things of note would take place. First, another younger bear would approach the rangers despite a warning shot being fired. Showing little to no fear, that bear would also be killed during the efforts to extract Timothy and Amy's bodies. An on-site autopsy of the adult bear's stomach contents would reveal human fingers and limbs, pointing to that particular bear as the one who had killed the couple. The second thing of note is that one of the video cameras recovered from the site had been recording during the attack. While the video is black, suggesting the camera may have had its lens on, it did manage to pick up 6 minutes of audio. This tape has never been released to the public and is in the possession of Timothy's ex-partner and friend Jill Palovic. However, a description of the tape does exist. The beginning of the tape starts with Amy asking if it's still out there, and is then followed by Timothy screaming, "Get out of here, I'm getting killed out here." The sound of a tent zipper opening is heard amongst the sounds of rain and wind. Amy screams for Tim to play dead. Her scream seems to scare the bear away for a moment, and then the couple begin to question whether the bear is actually gone or not. The bear then returns, and Amy backs away. Tim screams that playing dead isn't working and begs her to hit the bear. After a moment, Amy is heard screaming, "Fight back," and hits the bear on the head with what sounds like a frying pan as Tim moans in pain. It's believed around this time the bear had Timothy's head in its mouth and dropped it to go for his leg. Amy continues to scream loudly over the storm. Seemingly accepting he was going to die, Timothy yells, "Amy, get away, go away," hoping she would at least survive. Sadly, it would appear Amy did not leave, and most of the audio is Timothy enduring a slow, painful death he was completely conscious of. Soon the sound of the bear dragging Timothy away begins, and his screams grow further away, while Amy's become high-pitched and louder. What's even sadder is it's theorized that when Amy's screaming became louder and more high-pitched toward the end of the tape, it may have signaled to the bear to come back and kill her too. This is because her screams closely resembled the sound of a predator call, used by hunters to produce the distressed cries of a small wounded animal which often attracts bears. In August 2011, 19-year-old Olga and her stepfather Igor would go on a camping trip in the far east of Siberia. After a day of fishing, the two would return to their camp, only for Igor to realize he had left his fishing rod somewhere on the bank of the river. The two would return to the river and begin searching the bank for the missing rod, only to be interrupted by movement in the grass behind them. Turning to face this noise, they would see a brown bear appear from out of the grass, approaching Igor. Igor would slowly back away from the bear, but with the river to his back and the bear in front of him, even if he wanted to run, he couldn't, so he tried to yell and scream at it in the hopes that that would scare it away. Sadly, in mere moments, the bear was on top of Igor, with its jaws clenched around his neck. Olga would watch from only a few yards away as the bear broke his neck and smashed his skull. With no hope of saving her stepfather, Olga would attempt to run but only make it 70 yards before the bear latched onto her leg and dragged her down. But unlike Igor, it did not kill Olga so quickly. Instead, knowing she couldn't get away, the bear toyed with her. The details are somewhat limited, but this attack was slow enough that Olga was able to call her mother Tatiana, who lived in a nearby village. When Tatiana answered the call, Olga screamed, "Mum, the bear is eating me. Mum, it's such agony. Mum, help." At first, Tatiana thought her daughter was playing a prank on her, but quickly heard the pain in Olga's voice, and the sound of the bear growling in the background as it bit and chewed into her daughter's flesh. When the call cut out, Tatiana would attempt to ring her husband, not knowing he had been killed by the same bear now eating her daughter. Tatiana would then call the local police and Igor's brother Andrei, pleading with them to go to the river where Olga had been attacked. As 6 rangers and Andrei rushed to find Olga and her stepfather, Tatiana would receive another call from her daughter, where Olga would say, "Mum, the bears are back. She came back and brought her 3 babies. They're eating me." This agony would go on for close to an hour, and Tatiana, in between calls to the authorities and relatives, would have to listen to the mother bear and its 3 cubs slowly eat Olga alive. On the last call with her daughter, Olga understood that she was going to die and said to her mother, "Mum, it's not hurting anymore. I don't feel pain. Forgive me for everything. I love you so much." Half an hour after Olga's final call, the 6 rangers and Andrei would reach the river and see the mother bear still eating Igor's body by the riverbed. Further down, they would also find Olga, who had now passed away. After seeing this, the rangers would make the call to shoot and kill the mother bear and its 3 cubs. That's it for today, guys. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. Until next time.